Jacksonville, Florida. March 1st, 1974. 15,000 people were on their feet, screaming, when Elvis Presley suddenly stopped mid-song. The band fell silent. The crowd hushed in confusion. Down in the front row, a small boy, no older than 8, wearing thick glasses over eyes that had never seen light, had reached up toward the stage with both arms outstretched, his tiny hands searching the air. Elvis stood perfectly still, staring at the child. Then, without saying a word to anyone, the king of rock and roll stepped off the stage, knelt down in front of the boy, and gently took those small, searching hands and placed them against his own face. What the child said next, in a voice barely above a whisper, silenced 15,000 people so completely you could have heard a pin drop on the concrete floor. His name was Danny Reeves, and he had been blind since birth. A condition called Leber congenital amaurosis had robbed him of his sight before he ever had the chance to see the world, to see his mother's face, to see the sun rise over the Florida horizon. But Danny Reeves had never let his blindness define him. He was, by all accounts, one of the most joyful children anyone who knew him had ever encountered. Curious, warm, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to find beauty in everything around him. His mother, Carol Reeves, was a devoted Elvis fan who had saved for months to afford 2 front-row seats for the Jacksonville concert. She had played Elvis records for Danny since he was a toddler, watching his face light up every time that voice came through the speakers. "Mama, who is that man?" Danny had asked the first time he heard Elvis sing. "That's Elvis, baby," Carol told him. "He's the most famous singer in the world." Danny had thought about that for a long moment, then said, "He sounds like he's been sad and happy at the same time. How does somebody do that?" Carol had no answer for that, but she never forgot the question. On the night of the concert, Carol helped Danny navigate to their front row seats, describing everything she could: the massive stage, the curtain of lights, the thousands of people filling the arena. Danny sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, his head tilted slightly to one side in the listening posture that Carol knew so well. He was taking it all in through his ears, building his own picture of the world. When Elvis walked on stage and the crowd erupted, Danny grabbed his mother's arm. "Is that him?" he whispered urgently. "Is that Elvis?" Carol could barely hear him over the roar of the crowd. "Yes, baby," she leaned down and shouted into his ear. "That's him. He's right there in front of us." What happened next surprised even Carol, who knew her son better than anyone. Danny stood up from his seat, turned toward the stage, and raised both arms above his head, his small hands open and reaching, like a child asking to be picked up. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply reaching toward the voice that had filled his world with beauty for as long as he could remember. And somehow, in the chaos of 15,000 screaming fans, Elvis Presley saw him. Those who were there that night would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe the moment Elvis stopped singing. It was during Always on My Mind, one of his most emotionally charged ballads, when he simply trailed off mid-verse. The band, confused, stumbled to a halt. The crowd's roar turned to puzzled murmuring. Security guards tensed, scanning for trouble. But Elvis wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at one small boy in the front row, arms raised, hands searching the air above him, face turned upward with an expression of pure, unguarded longing. Later, people who saw Elvis's face in that moment said he looked like he'd been struck by something. His guitarist, James Burton, standing nearby, said he'd never seen Elvis stop mid-performance for anything. Not technical problems, not wardrobe malfunctions, not even the time a fan jumped on stage in Las Vegas. Nothing stopped Elvis once he was in the zone, until that night. Elvis handed his microphone to a stunned backup singer and walked to the edge of the stage. Security immediately moved forward, but Elvis waved them back with a sharp gesture. He sat down on the edge of the stage, his white jumpsuit catching the spotlight, and looked down at Danny. The boy's arms were still raised, still reaching, still searching. "Hey there," Elvis said quietly. The arena microphones were off, but those in the front rows heard him clearly. "What's your name, little man?" Danny's head turned immediately toward the voice. "Danny," he said, "are you Elvis?" A few people nearby laughed softly at the innocent directness of the question. Elvis smiled, that slow, genuine smile that his friend said was completely different from his stage smile. "Yeah," he said, "I am. Can I come down there and say hello?" Danny nodded eagerly, his face breaking into a grin so wide and pure that Carol felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. Elvis jumped down from the stage, a move that made his security team visibly wince, and knelt on the arena floor in front of Danny's seat, bringing himself to the child's level. "Your mama told me you've never been to a concert before," Elvis said gently, though Carol had told him nothing of the sort. It was simply something he'd sensed, some instinct honed by years of reading audiences. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir," Danny said formally, the way his mother had taught him to address adults. "I've never seen one." The word hung in the air between them. Elvis understood immediately what Danny meant. Not just that he had never attended a concert, but that he'd never seen anything at all. He looked at Carol, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Well then," Elvis said softly, "let me see if I can help with that." What Elvis did next was entirely instinctive, entirely unplanned, and entirely him. He reached out and gently took Danny's small hands in his own large ones. He could feel the boy tense slightly at the unexpected contact, then relax as Elvis's voice continued, low and warm and steady. "I'm going to let you feel my face," Elvis told him quietly, "so you know who you're talking to. Is that okay with you?" Danny nodded, and Elvis guided those small hands to his face. The arena had gone almost completely silent by now. 15,000 people holding their collective breath, watching the king of rock and roll kneel on a concert floor and offer his face to a blind child's touch. Danny's fingers moved slowly, carefully, the way blind people read, not grabbing or clutching, but reading, interpreting, translating touch into understanding. His fingertips traced Elvis's forehead, his brow, the bridge of his nose. They moved across his cheekbones, down to his jaw, back up to the curve of his lip. Elvis stayed perfectly still, his eyes open, watching Danny's face change as the boy built his own picture of the man behind the voice. Carol was crying openly now, her hand pressed over her mouth. In the front rows, others were too. Even some of the security guards, men paid to be tough, unmovable, professional, had wet eyes. The silence in that arena was the most profound silence anyone present had ever experienced in a public space. It was the silence of something sacred happening in plain sight. Danny's fingers reached Elvis's eyes, those famous, heavy-lidded eyes that had graced 1,000 magazine covers and made millions of women weak at the knees. He touched them gently, feeling the contour of the brow, the softness of the lid, the slight dampness that told him, without words, that Elvis was crying. The boy paused, his hand stilled against Elvis's face. And then Danny Reeves, 8 years old, blind since birth, said the words that broke 15,000 hearts simultaneously. He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely a whisper, and said, "You're sad, too, just like your songs." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. 15,000 people who had come to a concert expecting entertainment found themselves witnesses to something they had no category for, something that bypassed entertainment entirely and went straight to the core of what it means to be human. Elvis stayed absolutely still for what felt like a very long time, Danny's hand still resting against his wet cheeks. Then he made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, something in between, and wrapped his arms around the small boy in a hug that was fierce and gentle at the same time. "Yeah, buddy," he said, his voice thick and broken. "Yeah, I am." Carol Reeves collapsed into her seat, crying so hard she could barely breathe. The woman beside her, a complete stranger, put her arm around her shoulders. In the rows behind them, people were embracing each other, tears streaming freely, moved by something they couldn't quite name, but all felt simultaneously. The sudden, shocking recognition of shared humanity, the understanding that even the biggest, brightest icons in the world carry wounds that never fully heal. Elvis held Danny for a long moment, then pulled back and looked at the boy's face. "How did you know?" he asked softly. "How could you tell?" Danny thought about it with the seriousness only children can bring to important questions. "Because when you sing," he said carefully, "you sound like you mean every word. And the words are always about missing something. People who aren't sad don't miss things like that." Elvis laughed, a real, genuine laugh that those who knew him said was the most authentic sound he made. He stood up, still holding Danny's hand, and turned to face the silent arena. When the crowd saw his face, tears streaming, smile wide, something in his eyes that looked like relief, like a man who'd just had something important confirmed, they erupted. Not the frenzied screaming of a rock and roll crowd, but something different, something warmer and more human. Applause mixed with tears, cheering mixed with the sound of 15,000 people exhaling at once. Elvis finished the concert that night with a fire and tenderness that everyone present agreed was unlike anything they'd ever seen from him before. Between songs, he kept glancing to the front row where Danny sat, head tilted in his listening posture, a small smile on his face. After the final song, before the lights came up, Elvis dedicated the evening to "A young man in the front row who sees more clearly than anyone I've ever met." Backstage afterward, Elvis arranged for Danny and Carol to come meet him. He spent 45 minutes with them, an eternity by backstage standards, talking with Danny about music, about what different instruments sounded like, about which of his songs were his personal favorites. He gave Danny his personal copy of a gospel album he'd brought on tour, running the boy's fingers over the embossed lettering of the title so he could read it. When it was time to say goodbye, Danny stood up and held out his hand formally, the way his mother had taught him. Elvis shook it, then couldn't help himself. He pulled the boy in for one more hug. "You take care of yourself, Danny Reeves," he said quietly. "And don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't see the world. You see it better than most. Carol Reeves would tell that story for the rest of her life, not because of the celebrity of the man involved, but because of what it revealed about him. That beneath the sequin jumpsuits and the screaming crowds and the larger-than-life legend, Elvis Presley was simply a sad man who found relief in connection, who needed, just like everyone else, to be truly seen. And on that night in Jacksonville, a blind boy had seen him perfectly. Elvis Presley died 3 years after that concert in Jacksonville, at just 42 years old. But those who witnessed that night, the 15,000 people who watched a king kneel before a child, carried something home with them that no concert ticket could have promised. They carried the memory of a moment when all the noise and spectacle fell away, and two human beings, one famous and one unknown, simply recognized each other's pain and said, "I see you." Did the story move you? Do you believe Elvis's greatest performances happened off stage? Share your thoughts, your memories, and your favorite Elvis moments in the comments. Let's keep his real legacy alive, one story at a time.